All right, folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that's been making waves.
Yeah.
The Advocates Act Amendment Bill. You might be thinking, wait, wasn't that withdrawn?
Yeah.
Sure, right, it was. But trust me, this story is far from over. And understanding what happened here is crucial for any UPSC aspirant out there.
It really is. This bill, even though it's, been withdrawn, it still kind of shines a light on some of the tensions in India's legal and political landscape.
Exactly.
Like, we're looking right into the engine room of our democracy with this.
I like that. I like that a lot. So let's set the stage a little bit for our listeners.
Okay.
We're talking about a proposed overhaul of the Advocates Act of 1961. This is the rule book, so to speak, for the entire legal profession in India.
Right.
The government introduced this amendment bill, and it faced a tidal wave of opposition from lawyers across the country. Protests erupted, there were strikes, and ultimately the government had to back down.
Yeah. I mean, the backlash was so intense. That's what makes this so interesting. It shows how much the legal profession wants to remain independent.
Yeah.
And it raises some big questions about, like, who really holds the power when it comes to shaping the future of law in India.
Totally. So why don't we unpack some of the most controversial parts of this bill, the things that really got everyone fired up?
Yeah, let's do it.
And for you UPSC folks out there, keep your ears peeled because this touches on themes of governance, the rule of law, balance of power, all potential essay fodder.
Right. Absolutely.
So let's get into it. This is the one that really grabbed my attention.
Okay.
The bill proposed a complete ban on lawyer strikes and boycotts.
Oh, wow.
No more courtroom walkouts, no more collective action.
Yeah, to understand the weight of that, we need to look back at history. In India, lawyer strikes, they haven't just been about, like, pay disputes or internal squabbles. They've been a tool for social change, to push back against unjust laws or government overreach. Think about some of the landmark cases where lawyer activism played a role, in challenging discriminatory laws, fighting for the environment, demanding accountability from people in power.
So you're saying that taking away this right to strike could potentially silence a very important voice for change and accountability in Indian society?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why this specific provision sparked so much debate, so much concern. What worries many legal experts is the potential for this to be misused.
Right.
If strikes are illegal, what happens when lawyers see a corrupt judge or a government trying to interfere in the judicial process? What can they do?
It's like taking away this crucial safety valve that's supposed to be there for checks and balances.
Exactly.
Okay. Moving on to another hot button issue.
Okay.
The Bar Council of India.
Right.
The BCI. This is kind of like the self-governing body for the entire legal profession.
So right now, the BCI is largely independent. They handle, disciplinary actions. They set ethical standards. They essentially just make sure that things run smoothly within the legal profession.
Okay. But this bill wanted to change that, right?
Yeah. The proposed amendments would have allowed the government to appoint members to the BCI and even issue direct orders to them.
Wow.
It's a level of government control that a lot of people saw as a direct threat to the independence of the entire legal profession.
Okay, so help our listeners understand this. Why is an independent BCI so important? What's at stake here?
Think about it this way. You want your doctors to be certified by, an independent medical council.
Right.
You want your engineers to have to meet standards that are set by an autonomous body. It's about ensuring professionalism, ensuring ethics, ensuring public trust. An independent BCI does that same thing, but for the legal profession. It safeguards against political interference and ensures that lawyers are accountable to professional standards and not to whoever happens to be in power at the time.
Okay. Because if the government controls the BCI, then, couldn't they pressure lawyers to act in their favor? Or punish those who speak out against them?
Exactly. It could create what we call a chilling effect, where lawyers are afraid to take on cases that might challenge the government or, speak truth to power. And for citizens that need legal help, it erodes their confidence in the system.
Yeah.
They need to know that their lawyer is acting in their best interest and not, beholden to some political agenda.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got the strike ban, we got the BCI takeover.
Yeah.
What else did this bill try to change?
Well, it also went into the world of foreign law firms and lawyers that operate in India.
Okay.
Currently, there are restrictions on foreign lawyers fully practicing law here. They can advise, but they can't, represent clients in court.
Right. But this bill wanted to change that.
It did. It proposed giving the government more power to regulate the entry and operation of these foreign law firms. And this is where things get really interesting because it touches on economic considerations, professional competition, and even just the accessibility of legal service.
I feel like we're opening a can of worms here.
It is a very multi-layered issue. On the one hand, you have people that are arguing that allowing these foreign law firms to operate would boost the Indian economy, attract foreign investment, and give clients in India access to a wider pool of legal expertise.
Yeah, I could see that.
But at the same time, you have to think about the impact this could have on lawyers in India.
Of course.
Especially those that may not be able to compete with these big international firms.
So it's not just about legal principles and the rule of law. It's about people's livelihoods and the potential impact on the profession as a whole.
Exactly. And then you also have the question of access to justice. Would opening the market up to these firms make legal services more expensive and harder to access for the average person in India? These are complex questions.
Yeah.
With, no easy answers. And that's why this provision generated so much debate and anxiety.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
Okay, well, let's take a breather here and come back in part 2. We'll delve a little deeper into the other controversial parts of this bill, including that eyebrow-raising attempt to make lawyers financially liable for their clients' losses.
Oh, yeah.
Stick with us, folks. This is where it gets really juicy.
Yeah. Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were looking at the Advocates Act amendment bill and why it really ruffled some feathers in the legal world.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that these kind of technical legal changes, they can have big ripple effects. It's not just lawyers who are affected by this.
No, not at all. And that's something I think is really important for UPSC aspirants to understand. This isn't just about legal jargon. It's about understanding power dynamics, governance, the rights of citizens.
Right, because I think the average person looking at this might think, well, I'm not a lawyer. Why should I care?
Exactly. But that's what makes it so interesting. Let's take that ban on lawyer strikes, for example.
Okay.
On the surface, it might seem reasonable. Who wants these disruptions in the court system, right?
Right.
But think about it from the perspective of someone, an ordinary citizen who's been wronged or who's facing some kind of injustice.
Okay.
Historically, lawyers in India have used strikes to bring attention to systemic issues, corruption, biased judgments, or even laws that infringe on people's rights.
So it's a way for them to advocate for people who might not have a voice.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a form of checks and balances.
Yeah.
You take that away, you're silencing a crucial voice for accountability. And that ordinary citizen who's facing injustice has fewer options.
That's a really important point. It shows how connected the legal profession is to, the rights of everyday citizens.
And that connection becomes even more apparent when we look at that government control over the Bar Council of India.
Right, because we were saying the BCI is kind of like this watchdog, setting standards, making sure things are ethical. But if the government gets to control them,
then the body that regulates lawyers is potentially being influenced by, politics.
and that could have real consequences for people who need legal help.
Absolutely. Imagine you need legal representation, maybe a property dispute, a family matter, even a criminal charge. You want to know your lawyer is ethical,
Right.
that they answer to an independent body, not just whoever's in power.
It's about trust in the system, right?
Exactly. That trust erodes if there's a sense that the government is meddling in the legal profession.
Makes sense. And what about those foreign law firms we talked about? That seems like it adds another layer here.
It does. And there are valid arguments on both sides, remember that. People who want more liberalization say it'll bring investment, create jobs, make India more attractive for business.
So there's an economic angle.
There is. But then you have to think about the impact on lawyers here.
Yeah, the ones who might not be able to compete.
Right. And in this case, those who might lose out are already marginalized. Small firms, solo practitioners, those in rural areas. And that could impact access to justice for people who rely on them.
So it's this balancing act, modernizing versus making sure the system isn't only for the wealthy.
Exactly. And then there's that expansion of who can even be called a legal practitioner.
Oh, yeah. Remind us about that one.
So the bill wanted to include corporate lawyers and those working with foreign firms in that definition.
Okay.
Might seem like a technicality, but it could blur the lines between different types of legal professionals.
So you could have someone who mainly works in a corporate setting suddenly saying they have the same experience as a lawyer who's been in court for years.
That's the worry. And for someone just looking for legal help, it's harder to know who's truly qualified.
Like going to a doctor who actually studied, I don't know, botany or something.
It's not quite the same, but yeah, you want to be sure the person giving you legal advice knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. So we've talked about strikes, the bar council, foreign firms, and now who can even call themselves a lawyer. This bill was trying to change a lot.
It was. And that's why so many people push back. It felt like an attempt to control a profession that values its independence.
And for our UPSC listeners, it shows how these technical legal changes have big social and political impacts.
Very true. It reminds us to look beyond the headlines and see the bigger picture.
Okay, so we've gone over some of the biggest controversies, but there's still that part about lawyers being financially liable for their clients' losses. We got to unpack that next time.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Stick around, folks. This is where things get really interesting. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been really digging into this Advocates Act amendment bill, uncovering all the different layers.
It has been quite the journey. From lawyer strikes to foreign firms, this bill seemed to hit a nerve everywhere in the legal world.
And for our listeners out there, especially those getting ready for the UPSC exam, we've been trying to highlight why this all matters to you. These aren't just some abstract legal ideas. They have real-world impacts on society, politics, economics, the kind of things that could easily be on an essay question.
Absolutely. And the provision we're going to talk about now, I think it's a perfect example of that.
Okay, lay it on us.
We saved the most, dramatic one for last. The proposal to make lawyers financially responsible for the outcome of a case if their client loses.
Yeah, this is the one that had everyone talking. I mean, imagine the pressure on lawyers if they're on the hook financially for every case.
It's a pretty radical idea, and a lot of legal experts were immediately concerned. To understand why it's so controversial, we need to remember that legal cases, their outcomes are often uncertain.
Right.
There are so many factors that a lawyer can't control. The judge, the evidence, what the other lawyer argues, even just things that come up during the trial.
So are you saying that it's kind of unfair to hold a lawyer responsible for a loss when all those other things are happening?
Exactly. It's like blaming a doctor for a patient's illness just because the treatment didn't work perfectly.
Right.
Legal cases always have a degree of uncertainty.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate for a second. What were the arguments that people made in favor of this? Was there any justification for such a drastic measure?
Well, the arguments for it were mostly about accountability and trying to prevent frivolous lawsuits. People said that making lawyers financially liable would make them more careful about which cases they take,
Okay.
more thorough with their research, and more cautious about what they tell their clients.
So the thinking was that it would kind of weed out the weaker cases and make lawyers focus on ones that had a better chance.
That was the idea. But critics said that approach just doesn't work, and it could even have the opposite effect. For one thing, it could make lawyers afraid to take on risky or difficult cases, especially for marginalized communities or people who might not have a lot of money to cover potential losses.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It could make it harder for the most vulnerable people to get legal help.
Exactly. And it could also discourage lawyers from trying new legal arguments or challenging things that have always been done a certain way, which is how law evolves and protects people's rights.
So instead of making the legal system better, it could actually make it harder to get justice.
That's a key takeaway here. And for you UPSC folks out there, this is where you can really add your own analysis. Think about the big picture. How would this affect people's rights, the balance of power, those unintended consequences, and the ethics of it all?
It really shows how just one seemingly small legal change can touch on social justice, economics, and even the philosophy of our legal system in India.
It's a great example of that, yeah. And that's why this whole story about the Advocates Act, even though it's been withdrawn for now, it's still so relevant. It forces us to think about what the future holds for the legal profession in India.
So where do things go from here? We know the government said they'll come back with a new version of this bill. What should we be looking for? What needs to be fixed?
Well, the most important thing is that any new bill has to be made in consultation with the Bar Council of India and lawyers and everyone involved. It can't just be forced on them from the top down.
It goes back to that idea of having a legal profession that's independent and can uphold the law without the government interfering.
Right. And the new bill should also focus on reforms that actually improve things. Better access to justice, better legal education, things like that.
Right.
We can do things like streamlining how courts work, putting money into legal aid, and encouraging people to use alternative dispute resolution.
Finding solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. And last but not least, any changes have to be made with a deep understanding of India, its unique challenges, and its legal history. We can't just copy what other countries do without thinking about how it will fit here.
It's about finding that balance between modernizing things and keeping the core values of the Indian legal system.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today. For our listeners, especially those studying for the UPSC, I think this deep dive has given you a good look at how complicated law, governance, and justice are in India.
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple issue.
And it's not over yet, so stay informed, keep talking about these things, and form your own opinions.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand, the better you'll be at analyzing current events, speaking your mind, and maybe even shaping the future of the law in India.
So keep thinking critically, folks. This has been The Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed.
It has.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions or if you want to look at other current events that are important for the UPSC exam. We're here to help you understand this complex world, one deep dive at a time. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep striving for a better tomorrow. This episode was based on reporting from The Hindu.